Imagine a weapon forged from the bones of your enemies, sharp enough to pierce Roman armor. Yet historians believed it was just a myth, until archaeologists unearthed thousands of them in a mass grave in 2003. But the world of ancient weaponry holds far more than bronze and iron. Buried deep in forgotten battlefields and sealed tombs lie weapons crafted from materials so unexpected, so bizarre, that modern scientists struggle to explain how they were even possible. We're talking about swords sharper than surgical scalpels made from volcanic glass, daggers carved from meteorites that fell from the heavens, armor woven from materials that shouldn't exist in nature. These aren't Hollywood props or fantasy game items. These are real weapons, wielded by real warriors, steeped in mystery and carved into history by blood and conquest. Today, we'll uncover 7 of the most extraordinary ancient weapons ever created, each one crafted from materials more unexpected than the last. And we're starting with a weapon that was literally written in the stars. Weapon 1, the Tutankhamun dagger, meteorite iron. In 1925, Howard Carter made a discovery that would haunt archaeologists for nearly a century. Tucked into the wrappings of King Tutankhamun's mummy, right against the young pharaoh's thigh, was a dagger with a blade that gleamed unlike any bronze weapon of the era. But here's where it gets strange. The blade wasn't bronze. It wasn't copper. And in 1350 BCE, the technology to forge iron didn't exist in Egypt yet. So what was it made from? For 91 years, this dagger was one of Egyptology's greatest mysteries. The iron was too pure, too perfectly crafted. Some theorized it was a gift from a foreign king who had access to advanced metallurgy. Others whispered about lost technologies. Then in 2016, Italian and Egyptian researchers used X-ray fluorescence spectrometry on the blade. The results were shocking. The dagger contained 10% nickel and trace amounts of cobalt, a chemical signature that doesn't occur in terrestrial iron. This wasn't forged in any human furnace. Tutankhamun's dagger was made from a meteorite that fell from space. Now think about this for a second. Ancient Egyptians witnessed these rocks falling from the sky, blazing trails of fire across the night, sent by the gods themselves. They called this metal iron from the sky or *BIAEN pet star. To them, this wasn't just a weapon. It was a fragment of the heavens, blessed by the gods, powerful enough to protect a king in the afterlife. But the Egyptians weren't the only ones who discovered this cosmic metal. In fact, the next weapon on our list was so revered that an entire civilization built their religious practices around it. And it came from a meteorite that was 10 times larger. Weapon 2, Inuit meteorite blades, Cape York meteorite. In the frozen wastelands of northwest Greenland, the Inuit people faced an impossible problem. There were no trees for spears, no copper deposits for tools, no iron ore to mine. In the most resource-scarce environment on Earth, they had nothing to make weapons with, until the gods sent them a mountain made of metal. Around 10,000 years ago, a massive meteorite exploded over Greenland and shattered into fragments. The largest piece, weighing over 30 tons, embedded itself in the ice near Cape York. The Inuit discovered it and named it the tent, because it was as large as a dwelling. But here's the genius part. They couldn't melt it. They had no furnaces, no forges, no way to heat metal to 1,500 degrees Celsius. So instead, they used Stone Age technology to work Space Age material. They would heat the meteorite with fire, then hammer off small fragments using rocks. These fragments were then shaped into knife blades, harpoon points, and cutting tools through hours of patient grinding. European explorers who encountered the Inuit in the 1600s were baffled. These were Stone Age people using iron tools that were superior to European steel. The blades held their edge longer. They didn't rust in the salt spray of the Arctic Ocean. And most mysteriously, the Inuit refused to tell anyone where they got the metal from. It wasn't until 1894 that American explorer Robert Peary convinced an Inuit guide to show him the source. When Peary saw the massive meteorite, he immediately understood its value, not to science, but to his wallet. He hauled all 3 major fragments back to New York and sold them to the American Museum of Natural History for $40,000, worth over $1.5 million today. The Inuit lost their sacred source of metal forever. But meteorites and bones weren't the only unusual materials ancient warriors exploited. Sometimes, the deadliest weapons came from the earth itself, and the next one was so sharp, it's still used in surgery today. Weapon 3. Obsidian macuahuitl, volcanic glass. Picture this, it's 1521, and Spanish conquistador Bernal Diaz del Castillo watches in horror as an Aztec warrior swings a wooden club at a Spanish horse. In one strike, the weapon severs the horse's head completely from its body. The Spanish had steel armor. They had steel swords. They had cannons and crossbows. But they had never seen anything like the macuahuitl, a weapon that looked primitive but cut like nothing else in the world. Here's why it was so devastating. The macuahuitl was a flat wooden club, about 3 feet long, with rows of razor-sharp obsidian blades embedded along the edges. Obsidian is volcanic glass, formed when lava cools so rapidly that crystals don't have time to form. This creates an edge at the molecular level, literally 1 molecule thick. To put that in perspective, a steel scalpel has an edge about 300 nanometers thick. A surgical razor is about 100 nanometers. Obsidian? 10 nanometers. It's 3 times sharper than modern surgical steel. That's why even today, some eye surgeons use obsidian scalpels for operations requiring extreme precision. The Aztecs didn't have microscopes to know why obsidian was so sharp, but they knew it worked. They had access to massive obsidian deposits in the volcanic mountains of central Mexico, and they shaped these glass shards into blades sharper than anything the Spanish had ever encountered. But here's the catch, and this is crucial. Obsidian is incredibly brittle. Hit it against steel armor, and it shatters. That's why the macuahuitl was designed to be a slashing weapon, not a stabbing one. Aztec warriors aimed for exposed flesh, necks, limbs, faces. Against unarmored opponents, it was absolutely lethal. Against Spanish steel, it was a death sentence for the wielder. But before moving on, I would like to ask you for something. If you like these documentaries and want to support me, please consider subscribing. It's free. Now, you might think glass from a volcano is exotic. But wait until you hear about the next weapon, because it was made from something even more unexpected. Something that was once alive. Weapon 4, Maori patu, whalebone and nephrite jade. In the misty islands of New Zealand, the Maori warriors carried weapons that were more than tools of war. They were heirlooms, passed down through generations, each one carrying the *mana*, the spiritual power of every warrior who wielded it. The most prized of these was the patu, a short club used in close combat. And the elite versions were made from 2 extraordinary materials: the bones of whales and the sacred stone called punamu, or nephrite jade. Let's talk about the whalebone patu first. The Maori would harvest the jawbones or ribs of beached whales, creatures they considered gifts from Tangaroa, the god of the sea. These bones were incredibly dense, heavier than wood, and harder than most stones. A skilled carver would spend months shaping a single bone into a flat, paddle-shaped club about 18 inches long. The result? A weapon that could shatter a human skull with a single blow. Maori warriors trained from childhood in the art of *Maurikau*, traditional weapons combat. In battle, they would get within arm's reach of their opponent and strike with devastating speed. The patu wasn't meant to slash or stab. It was a bone-crushing bludgeon designed to end fights in seconds. But even more prestigious was the patu made from punamu, New Zealand's sacred jade. This stone is tougher than steel. It's so hard that Maori carvers couldn't cut it with metal tools. Instead, they used sand and water, grinding away for months or even years to shape a single weapon. Here's what makes this incredible. Nephrite jade has a toughness rating of 1000 on the Rockwell scale. For comparison, tool steel rates around 600. This stone can take impacts that would shatter granite. A punamu patu could strike an enemy weapon and not even chip. But the real power of these weapons wasn't physical. It was spiritual. Each patu absorbed the *mana* of its owner. When a great warrior died, his patu was buried with him, or passed to his son, carrying the strength of his ancestors. Losing your patu in battle wasn't just defeat. It was the ultimate dishonor. And speaking of honor, The next weapon was so revered that touching it without permission was punishable by death. It was made from a material that seems too delicate for war, yet it was worn by emperors. Weapon 5. Sharkskin swords, ray and sharkskin. In feudal Japan, a samurai's sword was his soul. But before the blade even existed, before the steel was folded and the edge was sharpened, the sword required something unusual: the skin of a creature from the deep ocean. Samurai sword handles, the *tsuka*, were traditionally wrapped in *samagawa*, the skin of rays or sharks. To Western eyes, this seems like a decorative choice. But to the Japanese, it was essential technology. Here's why. Sharkskin isn't like leather. It's covered in tiny, tooth-like scales called dermal denticles, microscopic structures that create a surface rougher than sandpaper. When you run your hand one direction, it feels smooth. Run it the other way, and it's like touching a cheese grater. Wrap that around a sword handle, and you've created the ultimate non-slip grip. Even when soaked in blood, rain, or sweat, a Samagawa handle won't slip from your hand. In the chaos of battle, when a samurai's life depended on his grip, this could mean the difference between life and death. But there's more. The panels of sharkskin were arranged so the rough texture faced outward. This meant that when a samurai gripped his sword, the tiny scales dug into his hand slightly, creating a mechanical lock between skin and weapon. It was painful during long battles, but that pain kept you alert, kept you focused. And it wasn't just swords. The same skin was used on sword scabbards, the *soyo*, to prevent them from slipping off a warrior's belt during combat. It was used on armor straps, on bow grips, anywhere that friction and grip were essential. But here's the darkest part. The finest *Samagawa* came from a specific species, the Japanese angel shark, hunted to near extinction by the 1800s because samurai demand was so high. A single sheet of perfect sharkskin could cost more than the steel for the blade itself. Yet even sharkskin seems ordinary compared to what's coming next. Because the next weapon wasn't just made from an unusual material, it was made from human remains. Weapon 6. Bone daggers, human and animal bone. In the highlands of Papua New Guinea, among the Dani people, there existed a weapon that anthropologists initially refused to believe was real. It seemed too dark, too taboo, too deliberately cruel to exist outside of horror stories. But it was real, and it was made from human bone. The Dani warriors would craft daggers from the thigh bones, specifically the femurs, of fallen enemies. After a battle, the bodies of slain warriors would be processed. The femur, being the longest and strongest bone in the human body, would be carved into a dagger about 12 to 18 inches long, sharpened to a point at one end. Now, you might be thinking, why? What's the point of using human bone when stone or wood is easier? The answer is psychological warfare. Imagine being a warrior from a rival tribe, and you see an enemy approaching with a dagger made from your kinsman's leg bone. That's not just a weapon. That's a message. It says, I killed your warrior. I desecrated his body. His strength is now mine. And you're next. In Dani culture, and many other tribal cultures across Melanesia and Polynesia, the bones of warriors retained their power after death. Using an enemy's bone as a weapon was the ultimate act of domination. It wasn't enough to kill your opponent. You had to erase their legacy, trap their spirit in servitude, and turn their very body into a tool for killing their own people. But it wasn't just the Dani. In Tibet, ritual daggers called *kangling* were made from human femurs, used in Buddhist ceremonies to symbolize the impermanence of life. In pre-Columbian Peru, the Moche culture crafted war clubs topped with carved human skulls and bones. Even in medieval Europe, there are accounts of warriors making knife handles from the bones of executed criminals. And it wasn't always enemy bones. In some cultures, warriors would request that their own bones be used to create weapons for their sons, a way of ensuring they would fight alongside their descendants forever. From a material science perspective, human bone is surprisingly effective. It's strong, lightweight, and can hold an edge when properly shaped. The femur, in particular, has a hollow core surrounded by dense cortical bone, almost like a natural composite material. But there's one more weapon that surpasses even this in sheer strangeness. A weapon that shouldn't work according to any logic, yet was used by one of the most successful warrior cultures in history. Weapon 7. Leather armor and shields, rhinoceros and elephant hide. In the sweltering jungles of South and Southeast Asia, metal armor was a death sentence. Steel trapped heat. It rusted in the monsoon rains. It was too heavy for jungle warfare. So ancient warriors turned to something unexpected: the hide of the world's largest land animals. Indian and Thai warriors crafted shields and body armor from rhinoceros hide, and when properly treated, it was nearly impenetrable. Here's the science behind it. Rhinoceros skin isn't like cowhide. It's not even like elephant hide. It's up to 2 inches thick in some places, composed of layers of collagen fibers woven in a crosshatch pattern that's similar to modern Kevlar. When an arrow or blade strikes, the fibers catch and distribute the impact across a wide area rather than allowing penetration. Ancient armorists discovered that if they boiled rhinoceros hide in oil or wax, then shaped it while hot and allowed it to dry, it would harden into a material as tough as wood but much lighter. This process, called cure bouillie in medieval Europe, created armor plates that could stop arrows, deflect sword strikes, and even resist early firearms. Indian warriors, particularly Rajput fighters, wore full cuirasses made of these hardened leather plates, sometimes reinforced with metal studs. Persian and Mughal manuscripts show warriors charging into battle encased in rhinoceros hide that gleamed like bronze but weighed half as much as steel. But the shields were even more impressive. A rhinoceros hide shield, stretched over a wooden frame and hardened, could stop a crossbow bolt at 50 paces. British colonial accounts from the 1700s describe Indian soldiers whose leather shields turned aside musket balls, early firearms that could punch through steel breastplates. And it wasn't just rhinos. Elephant hide was used for similar purposes, particularly in Southeast Asia. The hide from an elephant's forehead, the thickest part, was carved into small shields called plong. Thai warriors considered these sacred, often inscribing them with Buddhist prayers and magical symbols. Here's the tragic irony. These materials were so effective, so prized, that rhinos and elephants were hunted relentlessly for their hides. By the 19th century, several rhinoceros subspecies were extinct, driven to oblivion not by trophy hunters, but by armies who needed armor. And unlike metal, which could be recycled and reused, leather armor eventually rotted away. Today, only a handful of these shields survive in museums. Most have turned to dust, taking their secrets with them. What we're left with are accounts, descriptions, and the lingering question: how many other weapons, how many other technologies were made from materials so organic, so biodegradable, that they've been erased from history entirely? These 7 weapons prove that ancient warriors were more resourceful, more inventive, and more willing to experiment than we ever gave them credit for. They turned meteorites into royal daggers, volcanic glass into surgical blades, the bones of their enemies into instruments of terror. They didn't have metallurgy textbooks or materials science labs. They had observation, necessity, and a willingness to see potential in the impossible. So the next time you see an ancient weapon in a museum, don't just admire the craftsmanship. Ask yourself, what strange, what unexpected, what utterly bizarre material made this possible? The answer might be more incredible than you think. If you enjoyed this journey through history's strangest weapons, hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what we uncover next.